Hey, English 222ers. We are in Beats Week this week. So Monday is 427. If you look at your reading schedule, you realize that it's kind of roughly patterned in that this is the beat writers that we're covering this week, mostly 1950s, but some of them had continued careers after that. Jack Kerouac died many years ago, but Allen Ginsberg died in the late 90s, I think it was, and Gary Snyder's still alive, and he's still doing public appearances. I don't know if he still teaches any classes anymore, but you'll pick him up on readings and stuff on the web. Those are the main three we have. Now, the beats, some of the detail. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't finish that point. And that's next week. We're going to shift to some poets very specifically, and then we're going to shift to some fiction again before the end. And that's all we have is these 3 weeks, right? There will be a written section on the final still, the way I normally do it. I just have to get the logistics figured out. I don't want to pin you exactly into the regular class time period, but that might be the normal way we have to do it. So I'm checking on that. But one of the reasons you don't want to give up making students write is when they write is when they're showing their more sophisticated thought. So I can tell you a fact right now about the beats, for example. Now, B-E-A-T, it's always been argued what it actually means. And they themselves have said, well, it means more than one thing. Kerouac, especially, I think, identified with that concept that sometimes you see a guy at the end of the day and he's been working hard and he's got a lot of really common human things he's gone through that day, and he looks beat, right? So he looks beat down, he looks beat up, he looks beat tired. And that's one way to think of beat. Another way is that it's the root of the word beatitudes. Now, the beatitudes suggest a kind of a holiness or something good, like a big blessing or something like that, right? Now, and the other one, this is the one that a lot of people key on a lot, right, is beat, as in you have the beat. So it's it's in music, but it's also at the bottom of poetry, and arguably it's the bottom of all distress expression too, right? So I just saw with my kids Trolls World Jam or something like that. But anyways, there's this moment where they all lose music completely. They've lost all the different genres of music and everything, and they're standing there in this sort of gray world with not much distinction between individuals or even between the tribes of the music genres and stuff, right? But it's kind of funny how it really quickly jumped into my mind and one of my kids' mind that they needed a beat. And I wondered, is that because maybe we saw that Penguin movie, right, where the penguins are always performing music and they have to get it started? Not really sure, right? But the idea that beat originates in the human body is a very old idea. So, you have your heartbeat, which if you think of it in one way, it's kind of like an iambic beat. It's a double beat, right? That sort of thing, right? So anyways, beat can refer to any and all three of those things at the same time. What's not cool, though, is a few of the slang things. So the beats were sometimes called beatnik. And unless you're criticizing them on purpose, right, it's not a great phrase because it was thrown at them by the quote unquote square culture, right? The conventional culture that didn't like some of the stuff they saw the beats doing, which was mostly what we just see now is just slightly different than what everybody was already doing, right? But Nick, by adding Nick to the end of it, it's a reference to Sputnik and to the Russians, and that was during the Cold War and everything, right? So beats don't really like to be called beat. Now, some beats don't really like to be called beat at all. So Cubby Selby was one of my teachers. He died 15 years ago or so, and Cubby was absolutely writing during that time. He was doing some of the things the other beats were doing. His name is Hubert Selby Jr., so he wrote Last Exit to Brooklyn, and he wrote Requiem for a Dream. And those were made. One was made while he was still alive, but he was, not too many years away. And then Requiem was very close, I think, to the end of his life. So he even appears very briefly in an ugly scene in that movie. But Cubby, that's just his nickname, he never really liked being associated with the beats. And it may have been a simple kind of artistic thing of, well, I'm not with them. I don't get anything from them. They're not my friends, so it feels very strange to be included with them, right? But in some ways, it's not strange. He was interested in people on the edges and the outskirts. I'm going to come back to this because this is why I actually want you to read the beats this week. Sometimes they're not much taught anymore, right? Um, let's see where I was then. Okay, so another person is Amiri Baraka. So we're going to read something from Amiri Baraka, I think, next week, and I'll link to some places on YouTube. I really like one of his performances of a poem called Whalers, and I'm finding that if I have some sort of snip of video, it's pretty easy for me to move around and let you guys see. But when I have the legal stuff, uh, putting it somewhere seems to trigger things like some sort of scanners and stuff. So sometimes I'm like not allowed to post it, and it takes a while to figure this out, right? But we may have found that one of the easier ways to make sure you can get some of this stuff that's in bigger chunks is in my Dropbox. And I think it was Sharon from the class tested it and found out that you can download what I put in that Dropbox, but you can also play it right from there. So exactly how you click on that, I'm not sure yet, right? But that's what I'm really hoping, because after years and years of grabbing this stuff and trying to find the stuff that I thought spoke most quickly and elegantly about the topic, it's frustrating when they won't let me throw stuff up. Now, in case I don't get it this week, though, one of the best things about the beats is is a documentary called The Source, Source. Now, I think it's a much better documentary after you've looked into the beats a little bit and learned more about them. And the reason is because there's a lot of tiny cool things in the documentary that are not obvious and wouldn't be noticed by someone who doesn't know more about the beat. So an example of this is when an actor is reading a piece of Howl, which is a poem by Allen Ginsberg. In the background is uh, music that was written, Rhapsody in Blue. It's a piece from Rhapsody in Blue, and it was written by a Jewish man. I don't know if it was the 30s, 20s, I don't remember what decade it was, right? But it was always an issue that he was a guy who was turned on by rhythms, especially African rhythms in music. And so when he started to make his own music, he pulled in, just like Whitman did, a long time ago, pulled in rhythms that were traditional to his family and his cultural upbringing, but then that he heard out there. And some of those were some of the rhythms that you find in blues music, some of the rhythms you find in other kinds of opera, things like that, right? But anyways, it's Gershwin, one of the Gershwins. And I think it's just nice that it's tucked in there underneath Ginsberg reading his poetry, because Ginsberg emphasized countless times that he was Jewish and he was gay and he was ugly. And you can, some of those may be more factual than just subjective, right? But anyways, that Ginsberg thought that was an important thing to say. And as we study this semester and we notice representation, we want to remember that representation is partially who is doing the representing, right? So Ginsberg is representing gay men and he is representing Jewish men. But he's also, if he creates a character who's gay, Jewish, something like that, right? That's another kind of representation that's in the literature itself, right? And I think it's particularly valuable to think of this with the Beats, because they were looking to people who weren't traditionally represented in our literature. Now, over time, people have pointed out that, well, yes, they were doing that, but eventually they still produce a kind of a narrow band of representation. So a lot of beat stuff is considered very masculine. Some of it with a kind of an old-fashioned, not welcome anymore, controlling masculinity, or like a superiority complex type stuff, right? And that's true. Also, they were mostly white. The heart of them were actually, at least at first, were college educated people, and some educated at expensive colleges, right? So they might have been talking about gay men turning tricks in the middle of the night somewhere to get along, and they might have been talking about migrant farm workers trying to fill bags and having their little kids work right with them to make money. But that's not the lifestyle they lived most of the time, right? So, but I don't like to throw them away for this. In other words, Kerouac put passages in some of his writing about minorities on the fringes of American society, and he celebrated them in general, right? So I think that's a good thing. I don't think we throw that away just because, well, maybe you might have preferred that it was a migrant picker himself who was writing it or something, right? So I think we want to remember that, right? Um, anyways, we can see these characters. I mentioned Cubby Selby a minute ago, and so Hubert Selby was putting in characters who were transvestites, characters who were prostitutes, addicts of different kinds, um, men who were living a straight life, and they had a wife and they had a kid, and then they might be completely opened up to a gay affair or something like that, right? These are not the most amazing topics as far as you may have never heard any of them before, right? But back in the day, nobody printed this material in general, right? So I think Ginsberg actually got away with more than a lot of the others because his passages are so poetically cryptic, you don't always know what he's talking about. Later, when somebody pointed out that he's talking about some sort of sexual activity that, that the great conventional America of the 50s didn't welcome, maybe nobody saw that before somebody put it in print. They were also smart enough, though, to find printers to help them get their ideas out there, and a community that was supportive also, right? Okay, so on my desktop here, I think you can see it, right, is Kerouac. So that's, I don't know how young he was. It's in 56. So he's 35 or so at that time, right? Now, Kerouac is sometimes considered the fiction writer. It's of course much more accurate to say he's the most famous fiction writers because there were others, right? But he's the one that sticks out the most. His writing doesn't survive as well when tough specific criticism is sort of aimed at it and stuff, right? And I think it's one of those issues where the magic that he has isn't necessarily magic that does well in the whole college scrutiny kind of game and stuff, right? So, and I tell people to read Kerouac when they're young because some of the things you care so much about when you're young, he is hitting on those things, but maybe he's not as politically correct as you might later need him to be or something, right? So an example is that Kerouac likes to be with working class people. One of Kerouac's friends was a juvenile delinquent who stole cars all the time. And that's partially how he became a great driver, right? So Kerouac's not distancing himself. He's embracing these kinds of people who had sort of some hard luck lives, who had those tough fathers who didn't understand them, who grew up to realize a kind of sensitivity and artistic sentiment, and sometimes even a sexual curiosity, right? But also feelings that they had been grown up to be taught were very bad, and they were starting to feel this stuff, and they felt it was authentic. It wasn't just to be a radical or something like that, right? So Kerouac, he got to hang out with some of them, and his writing was affected. But he's sort of famous, so we're going to get some of his fiction. He's too famous, right, for writing nonstop. And what he showed off more than one time, including on television, was like a block of butcher paper, or the kind, if you went to a butcher, they would roll it off a roll and then tear it off and wrap your meat in it, right? And that could be put into a typewriter. And then, when you would get to the end of your line, you'd hear the bell ding, but you could just keep typing. Whereas before, when we had these non-yet automatic typewriters, every time you'd write up, like 14 words or something like that across the page, it would ding and you'd have to hit it. Most writers would tell you that didn't really interrupt them because, they got used to it. Just they never noticed it after a while, right? But you do have to change the pages, and I always thought that was kind of a pain. So it did take some time. So Kerouac would say when he wanted to, be in that narrative flow and stuff, he would write that way. But what's happened is added on to that reality, the truth of that story, is this idea is then he didn't edit it, that what ended up making it into the books was what he wrote on that paper, and he didn't really do much editing after that. And that's just not really true. And some scholars will tell you that it's not too hard to find his passages where he worked harder in the editing of, rather than some of the other stuff where he didn't probably do much editing on top of them, right? And some people, when they study Kerouac, this is the center of their study, right? I like him, though, for some of that magic, the feeling that he captures. And a few writers can do this, but he's definitely one of these people who, when he talks about, like, getting in a car and not having enough food and not really knowing where you're going to go or how far you can go, but, you're digging, your friends, and you're digging the music, and maybe one of them's got a guitar and stuff. And so you go on the road in America, and you got this wonderful young personal thing, but he's smart enough to know that also connects you to anything from cowboys going across the prairie to wagons crossing the Continental Divide and going down toward the West Coast when hardly anybody was there and stuff. Right? He has that connection between the sort of real and detailed reality and some of the flights of fancy that metaphoric and um, metaphysical thought can do. Right? So last week we had Annie Dillard, and she's the master of taking a tiny thing and then meditating on it in a way that draws connections, and she can connect the human world to an animal world. She can talk about a weasel, for example, who they found a hawk or an eagle that had died, but stuck to its head when it died was the skeletal head of a weasel that had clamped onto the bird's throat and had died. And then over time, of course, the flesh ends up rotting off this, but that skull never let go, right? The skull never released. And Annie Dillard takes that idea found in A True Thing of Nature and works into it an idea of, do we live like that? What would it be like to live like that, right? And maybe we should do it more often, live like that weasel. So 100% purposeful and in the moment, right? Of course, she's a very smart woman, and she knows that her metaphor also might be in connection with things like the sacrifice that the weasel actually made. So it's great to be super intense, but that doesn't mean it's danger free, right? Okay, so anyways, I love the way Jack Kerouac flies off into those different directions, and he was a bit of a, when we say sometimes a bartender is an amateur psychologist, right? He was a little bit like that, and an amateur sociologist and anthropologist, in that at least for me, a lot of the passages I like is when he's talking about people he's met along the way, and what they're like as individuals, but then also what they're like in groups, right? So anything from an ethnic group to a group of working class men, for example, right? Now let me try to find one of his co-buds, right? Do we find the beats? Yeah, I'm gonna have to type it in. Okay, so I'm gonna look for Ginsberg right now. Now, I never can remember whether it's an E. It is an E, like an iceberg, right? I always start to say U, right? So here's Allen Ginsberg, and I had the great pleasure of getting to see him live. It looks like about 2 years, maybe. No, that's not right. About 3 years before he died or so, he was at USC, and I fought my way in because it was overcrowded, and we had 100 people sort of hanging their legs off the balcony. We were squeezed in to the point where we didn't want the fire department to hear about it, right? But he had been famous and around for so long that all of us really felt this was a treasure to get to sort of visit him. And he did one of the things he was famous for. He turned that reading into a more special reading. Okay, so I kind of laughed because he would say something seriously and then something sort of tongue in cheek, and sometimes you didn't know if the crowd got it. And so he pulled out what he said were going to be African clicking stones, right? And so he pulls out from a bag 3 rocks. And so I think that was a half joke, right? Because when they're used in music, well, they are African clicking stones, but at the same time, they're just rocks, right? But what he was doing was emphasizing how important the beat is and how wonderful it can be, but also to a group. So he had us together recite some William Blake, who's a very famous poet from Britain, and who has a lot of poetry that has a strong established rhythm and beat, and sometimes Blake is writing in form. But anyways, it was interesting as a group. I had never done that, chanting like that to a particular poem or something, right? So that was terrific. And then, as was also the kind of thing he might do, I think he had a poem called "To My Anus," and it specifically spoke about that particular bodily orifice, right? And I think we sang a little bit, and other people joined him on stage. Now, we didn't have a total be-in or one of the great famous kind of happenings from back in the 50s and 60s and early 70s and stuff, right? But it was a pretty special day. It was great, right? That day, I don't think he read much on Hal, but Hal is going to be the center of you guys' reading. You can find this on YouTube. You can find somebody else reading it. There's many different people. This poem has turned on many people for a long time. But here's what's going to happen when you get into the specific words. There's going to be lots of phrases that don't automatically make sense to you. And even if you think about them for a while, they still may not either. He loved to take off on fancies of phrasing and to provide images that you felt are probably more personally available than publicly. Meaning, when he says angel headed hipsters, we got a vague idea about that. And we think about the people out there in the world. These were hippies, right? Not millennial hipsters, but hippies. And the idea saying angel headed, does that mean that they actually took angel dust? Or does that mean that, no, they just had wonderful positive ideas in their heads and stuff, right? And so these ideas can sort of, they can be growing in your mind. But maybe Alan had a very specific idea of a certain group of guys that he knew or something, right? So the poem will feel very personal in ways that are not going to be explained. It feels a lot like reading some of Whitman, who he considered a kind of a literary godfather, but also some of like The Wasteland that we've read, where you feel like, do I need a code book for this, or what am I missing? But one of the things to do is, of course, you want to study and spend some time, but I don't think you need to get everything in a lot of poetry to get something out of the poem. That's a canard. That's like a bad myth, basically, right? I love a lot of movies. And even movies I may have seen 4 or 5 times, I might watch it and still see and appreciate something in it I didn't see before. That doesn't mean that I didn't get the movie before. It just means that, like a lot of pieces of art, it keeps growing, partially because when you revisit it, keep growing, right? Well, so poems where, you feel like, man, I'm only getting 20% of this poem. Maybe that's enough sometimes, right? So, of course, college is telling you all the time you're supposed to get everything, right? But that's a total myth. So I hope when you listen to how you listen, not just for whatever phrase or image means, but also the sense and the tone of the time. This was a shock, and a very pleasant shock to the inside crowd when Alan came and performed Howl for the first time at a bookstore, a famous bookstore now up in San Francisco. And it was recognized by several people as this is an important poem, right? And other people wanted it banned and they wanted it kept down. But it is a great part of what his reputation is built on, and I think it's deservedly so. Even today, it reads really well, right? Now, I've mentioned this a couple of times during the semester, but sometimes we'll have a writer that I know some things about that I know some of my students might find interesting, but I really won't have time to go into it too much, right? Ginsberg is one of the most famous gay poets. And if that's interesting to you for 1,000 different reasons, right? He's a very easy person to learn more about it and find him talking about it and his friends talking about him. He was as open a book as most people ever are or can be. And so he talks directly. So I think that's refreshing sometimes to people who say, well, what did it feel like to be gay in the past? Or, what were the specific things that were difficult about that, for example, right? Something always pops into my head when I'm thinking about this is that the actor who plays Gandalf, who got very famous for playing Gandalf, right, is a British actor who's been in the game for a long, long time. And he's been an out gay actor, Englishman, for decades, basically, right? Well, when he showed up in the first X-Men movie, some people were kind of shocked. They thought he was a more like classical performer, and of course he could have done Shakespeare instead of filming with them. But part of what he said in the interviews was he had been told by somebody that one of the most treasured sets of stories in the comic book world was the X-Men, and that he appreciated that, and he appreciated that young people seeing themselves discussed, even if it's in a symbolic way, right? So if you haven't got it yet, right, when you watch X-Men, they all have mutations, and many of those are not welcome by their society or by their family. So you can see how that metaphor can easily be sort of picked up, or it's an analogy or even allegorical to being gay, or being gay in a certain decade maybe, or something like that, right? Or being gay in a certain kind of family situation. Anyways, Ginsberg is, he's it's all right in your face right there. So it's easy to catch on to what he's talking about and then to go deeper if you want to, right? He's not, we're not, we're not just discussing subtleties and rumors instead of facts, right? So when people talk about whether Langston Hughes was gay, for example, a lot of that discussion has a very unseemly quality to it because you sort of feel like, well, he could have said something or somebody else could have said something, but they chose not to. So where exactly are we going with this particular debate, right? Okay, so that's Allen Ginsberg. He's the most famous poet of that time period. And I'm going to click to the next one, who's simply on our reading list, and that's Gary Snyder. I don't really like to be on stage, to read poetry, but sometimes I'll sort of make myself go up there, right? And it's just always uncomfortable. But once in a while, you get one of those little feelings to make you feel a little bit better about it. And I read one of my poems about Glen Canyon, which is a place in the desert. Most people have heard of it as Lake Powell. Every one of my students has seen it because it's in so many movies. The terrain itself and the Moki marbles, that are made of stone they're hanging up on the cliffs and things like that, right? That scenery has been used in so many different movies, and it's even used in video games. So whenever I play Horizon Zero Dawn, I go into a section there, and it's just like a Glen Canyon area of Arizona and Utah, right? So, anyways, I wrote my poem, and I was really paying attention to details, and I was trying to learn the scientific side too. So, for example, you see this red stone that's out there, and you wonder, well, why is that red and stone over here not so much, right? And the simple answer for that is, well, it has a lot of iron in it, or in some cases, iron has moved from one place to another. So, iron may have leached from one set of rocks down onto another set of rocks. Anyways, in my poem, I tried to be very specific with my language. I tried to discuss not only some of the sort of new world way of understanding nature, which is scientific, but also to stay in touch with older ideas. So I learned some of the other names for some of those constructions in nature that Native Americans had already used, many generations before I ever saw any of that, right? But anyways, short story long, which is my specialty, right? Somebody came up and said that my poetry had reminded her of Gary Snyder's poetry, that she liked it and it reminded her of Gary Snyder's. I was like, that's awesome. If anybody finds something and compares me to another poet, it's like that's one that I really appreciate, because Gary's poetry, the stuff that people have paid the most attention to, and I don't usually call these people by their first names. I think I'm just seeing it right up in front of my face now, right? But Snyder's poetry, it's not all nature poetry, but that is what he's most well known for now, right? So in our reading, I know we have a poem called Rip Rap, and that's one where he's enjoying the language and the realities of nature and our traditions. He's talking about why we would lay riprap down or leave it if it's naturally occurred somewhere, and what does that mean? And then he's referencing how when we use language, we're doing some of the things with words or with phrases that we do with stone if we're making a path, for example, right? Anyways, you'll get to that, and hopefully I'll put something on, maybe some commentary for riprap also, right? Okay, so these are the main three. Now, one of the other very much most famous of the beats is William S. Burroughs. We don't have a passage to read by him, but if you're interested, he's fascinating. His very experimental stuff, I've read hundreds of pages of it, but it isn't my favorite type of experimentation. But some people love it because it gets hallucinogenic. You wonder sometimes how much of it he conceived on LSD or heroin or a drug he took, right? But the fascination sometimes to me doesn't add up to as much. It's interesting, visually amazing, but sometimes, I'm left a little cold by it, right? Whereas I mentioned Selby a while ago, Hubert Selby, and he's experimental also. It's going to take a couple dozen pages of reading Selby to just deal with his made up grammar and punctuation. He will take a word that you've seen before but not use an apostrophe, and he'll put in a backslash or something, and for a while you're like, what is he doing here, right? Well, he was kind of making it up as he went along, but it does give you a different experience than all the other stuff you're probably reading, right? So anyways, I like Selby's experimentation and the fact that it's always definitely connected to like humans and the human heart and suffering. Not only the suffering that humans cause each other, but also the suffering that humans can actually alleviate when someone else is suffering, right? So if you want to read somebody experimental, from this period, Hubert Selby Jr. is my favorite. And then from a little farther on is a writer named Robert Coover, who I'm amazed is not in our book in a better way, right? Okay, I'm gonna let you go for a while. Okay, so um, this is just the intro to our beat week. Okay. And I never can figure out how to turn it off when this mode is on. I have to collapse everything up here. Nope, that's not right.